G'day. Here's a short story that I wrote at about 4 o'clock this morning. I was feeling a bit hopeless, had a terrible attempt at sleeping, bad dreams and shoulder pain and all the rest of it. Started writing this feeling dismal, but by the end of it had a lot more hope and a bit of humour that I tried to chuck into the story. And I hope that it uplifts you a bit, this story. It's called The Day of the Dove. She held the young bird outstretched in trembling hands that were terrified of their awful, unintentional ability to snap bones and stop tender hearts. "I can't do it. I'm scared. It's moving. Help, do something," she called through the kitchen window. He smiled and held back the ugly sob that he could feel swelling in his throat. Then he turned his cheek away for a few moments to keep his dewy eyes from her face. She couldn't have noticed those beginnings of tears, preoccupied as she was with the floppy dove, and he couldn't have risen to help her either. In that moment of hot-blooded motion and pandemonium, neither had realised their respective blind spots. Old reflexes said that her husband would stand up and take over, and likewise, the man who was used to feeling so seen by his wife had unconsciously assumed that her focus was on him. He hated crying in front of her, and in times where tears threatened his composure, he'd turn his back to conveniently tinker on some other job if such luxury was available. It wasn't available anymore in this body that would not obey his mind, and that mind, as it had done more and more these days, began to attack itself. Stupid, just bloody stupid. You're a stupid, selfish man, Terry, and you're dragging her down. And now you're feeling sorry for yourself again. Pathetic. Just bloody pathetic. No wonder all of this happened. And all this wallowing, it'll kill you too. The young dove tried to flap one wing and fluttered it free of her cupped hands with moth-like murmurs that widened her eyes and extracted a corresponding murmur of her own. She was, for various reasons, not a person who easily gravitated to touching small animals, and picking up the dove after a misguided fight or flight instinct had sent it crashing into their kitchen window was substantially out of her comfort zone. She might have come across as uncaring to the casual observer in the reluctance that she'd shown to even acknowledge the flailing animal, and, after he'd insisted that she act, the unease with which she'd stepped out into the cold to help it. This would be a deeply mistaken impression. She was a woman with an uncommonly nurturing nature, to whom compassion, joy, and gentle kindness were as deeply enmeshed as her own heartbeat. However, she was also a woman who, if presented with her own fight or flight situations, shared the rabbit's reaction to an overpowering spotlight and neither fought nor fled, just stood and blinked and waited, frozen, for her faculties to allow a reaction that she'd inevitably pick to pieces hours and days down the line. So, with the dove in her hands, she struggled with the door handle while her husband sat helpless and fought the shame and frustration that had slid into his skull as deeply unwelcome travelling companions since the accident. "Idiot, Terry, bloody idiot. Get it together. There has to be something you can do to help her." He was torn between rummaging instinctively around the table's clutter for some mysterious magic bullet that might help, and channeling his efforts towards encouraging his wife with the tiny thrashing burden in her hands. He decided to do both poorly. "That's good, honey. That's fine. You're fine. Just, do that like that, Gabby. There you go," he called in her general direction, while knocking a jar of pens and paper clips onto the floor in her path. She yelped as her toes crunched into the bulldog clips, and just about tripped backwards like some absurd cartoon character on a cartoon banana as her feet rolled around the 10 million pens that rattled about on the tiles. After this unwitting sabotage produced a still more vigorous shriek that reverberated around the kitchen tiles, she met his eyes, and he met her eyes, and the dove obediently stopped trying to flee and mercifully decided against fighting. And the shriek slowly transformed into a laugh. She possessed the trait of laughing so loud and so forcefully that it sounded like she was going to injure herself. It was a raspy, ripping sound that was radically out of kilter with her pretty features, and it had alarmed him when he first heard it, as though she was at risk of bringing up a lung or two. And it was a sound that, after years of being together, still brought him more mirth than any other sound he had heard in his life. It was indeed a laugh entirely unlike any other he'd ever heard in his life, and it was gloriously, unabashedly, and unambiguously her laugh, and her laugh alone. In the 2 or 3 seconds before this, he was about to say a few things that his newfound inadequacies had nearly brought oozing to the surface. He'd planned to tell her that it felt like he was being ripped in half, that it felt like a powerful cold claw was on one kidney and another razor-sharp claw was on the other kidney, and he felt so sick that the heartache pains inside of his guts, physical, visceral, wincing pain, it felt like he was being torn into 2 pieces right in front of her. He'd perhaps thought it might otherwise be phrased as him feeling like he was drowning, or that he had been in hell for the last 6 months, the heat having slowly risen to levels that were starting to kill him. He was going to tell her that the dove was probably going to die. He would have said that while she could just put it in a shoebox and hope for the best, it might be kindest if they were just to drown the poor creature and be done with it. But in that moment, she looked at him and laughed, the dove bobbing its head ridiculously in one clenched hand, the other splayed out, like some proud acrobat taking a bow for executing such a masterful trick. He found that instead, he began to laugh too. It is a beautifully intuitive reaction that when one person laughs with all of their heart, someone who hears it must take that feeling into their own heart, and quite involuntarily finds themselves reciprocating that uncontrollable joy in their own laughter. He was suddenly no longer being ripped in half, nor drowning, nor burning. He was chuckling, then roaring. Then they were wheezing and sputtering, breathless with laughter, with cheeks that hurt from smiling and abdominal muscles beginning to ache from the exertion of sharing this flash of happiness together. And so their symphony of sounds bounced and wove and entwined and curled around each other as they bloomed in the echo of the kitchen's tiles, as the rose and the briar from ancient songs grows higher in one combined stalk from their shared grounds of sorrow. In that moment he knew he would recover, and she knew she'd be waiting for him as long as it took. And the floppy dove fumed amongst their laughter, and harboured its own premonitions that it would survive this shock, to see again soaring days when the barriers fate had put between it and the eternal blue skies that it had fled from would be removed.